So what are the benefits of preconception healthcare? Well, better natural fertility and IVF outcomes, better quality ova and sperm, healthy pregnancy, birth and postpartum, and the child's health potential is likely to be very much improved. So there's so many reasons to take the time to invest in preconception healthcare and in your health in general in your reproductive years. So what it involves, and this is based on back in the 90s, there was a study that was done which utilized preconception healthcare. And these were the things that they introduced, and they got phenomenal results, almost doubling the fertility and IVF success rates. So the aim was to reduce all potential harmful toxins and add in essential nutrients. And those things included optimizing nutrition, having a water filtration system, avoiding toxins, the usual ones, avoiding chemicals, all those creams and things that contain phthalates and parabens on the skin. So using natural cosmetics, avoiding toxic hair dyes and household chemicals, cleaners, plastics, microwaves, etc. Reducing or minimizing electromagnetic pollution, so taking stuff out of the room, especially at night time where you're sleeping for 8 hours, that could be having effect, like the mobile phone, turning that on airplane mode if you've got to have it in your room. Also managing sleep and stress, having a fertility medical checkup, as well as looking at nutrient status. And I've just included gene testing because that was not included back in those days. Making sure the tubes are clear, having a look at the uterus morphology, and microbiome check, another new test that's been added, looking at genitourinary infections and understanding your fertility through natural fertility awareness, so your body signs. So going back to that figure, 1 in 6 couples in Australia are unable to conceive. That was a 2021 statistic. But it takes 2 to tango, and we know this. So it's estimated that 20% of fertility issues are male factor only, 30% are combined, and 50%. So 50% in total are linked to males. So they are really not off the hook. It really takes 2 to tango, and we want that 3 months, even 4 months prior to conception to optimize fertility. So we're going to talk a little bit about sperm because there has been, unfortunately, because they are the smallest cell in the body, there's been a lot of decline in the average sperm counts over the last 50 years and in the quality. So the things that typically reduce male fertility, the common suspects, we've sort of just touched on: environmental toxicity, obesity, high cholesterol, blood pressure and heart disease, diabetes, poor stress and sleep, medications, local injury, surgery, varicocele infections, low testosterone, effects of prolactin, alcohol and drugs, smoking and diseases. So the sperm being the smallest cell in the body, that men are producing about 1,000 per second. They're very, very vulnerable, highly vulnerable. So in fact, they do provide one of the most sensitive biological markers for male health. Sperm DNA damage counts, and sometimes you need to convince your reproductive specialist to include a DNA fragmentation on a regular semen analysis. And I'd just like to convince you that it's very worthwhile, because DNA damage in sperm is a major factor in the failure of couples trying to conceive. And evidence links oxidative stress to male infertility, and sperm DNA damage is caused by oxidative stress and is associated with recurrent miscarriages as well as lower fertility. A 2024 report showed that sperm DNA fragmentation index affected fertility and pregnancy outcomes and offspring safety. And actually, the American Society for Reproductive Medicine now recommends it as it's been recognized and recommended as a test for couples trying to conceive, particularly if they've had 12 months of not being able to conceive. But why would you wait? If you are an older couple, you don't have a huge window for fertility. So it's better to be preemptive, and sperm are very, very responsive to treatment. If we can work out what's causing the damage, we can improve sperm so easily in 3 months. So, as I said, the chromosome damage, it increases with aging, but it affects pretty much all aspects of fertility. The ability to conceive, it increases miscarriage risk, and it can also affect offspring if there's high DNA fragmentation. So things like poor nutrition, age, oxidative stress from alcohol and smoking, increased weight, occupational hazards, pretty much anything can be toxic to those tiny little sperm who are so vulnerable. And there's not lots of nutritional deficiencies found in men. So in 3,000 men who went through Fertility First, there were about 59% of them that had some sort of nutritional deficiency. And many of those nutrients are involved in combating oxidative stress. So that's when, the sperm get damaged by reactive molecules, just like when you leave an apple out and you've had a bite in it and goes brown because of oxidative stress. Well, sperm get affected by oxidative stress as well. So they need this protective shield that's provided by a lot of nutrients. And if any of those nutrients are missing, it could mean that the sperm don't have as good a protective shield. So these are some of the antioxidants that I like to use and that have been written up in the literature. So this was a systematic review of antioxidant types in male fertility that has good research and evidence base behind it. And many of these I'll talk about in a male fertility seminar coming up. And I talked about a lot of these nutrients in my Excellent Eggs webinar that I did a few days ago and will be available on my website, Rebecca Tanner Natural Health, in a few weeks' time. The most important health check for males is really a semen analysis, and that should include sperm antibodies and a DNA fragmentation test. It's a non-invasive test. Imagine if women could have a completely non-invasive tests for their fertility and a complete fertility report card. It's just not available for women. It is also, as I said, the quintessential biomarker for health, and also it really does reflect disease and mortality risk. So I would encourage all males to have a semen analysis and include that DNA fragmentation test. And these are not expensive tests. You may be out of pocket, say up to $200, $300, but that is a beautiful report card and a window into a male's health and fertility that is just invaluable. So where do we start? Common factors affecting female fertility. So we're going to focus on the female now, because if we've got that beautiful report card for men, that's what we need, and then we can work backwards. For females, it's a bit more complicated. So there's a lot of the same factors that are affecting female fertility, and age being the top of the list, and toxicity and stress and poor sleep. Also the history of contraceptive use and infectious history and reproductive conditions, inflammatory load. So many things can affect female fertility. So although we're designed to be fertile, it's amazing how modern day living is really sort of competing against us being fertile. So if we can reduce many of these factors, we can actually let that beautiful fecundity surface again. So for confident conception, we want to have medical and functional testing. This is, we want to detox and de-stress. We need to address nutritional, diet and lifestyle factors, and we need to understand our fertile body signs. So female medical investigations include blood tests, having a hycosi, which is basically an ultrasound followed by a saline flush that looks to make sure that the tubes are cleared, and an ultrasound gives an idea on the uterine morphology. So combined with that, having an infection screen, and there may be other tests that are required. So often there's a lot required in a female fertility workup. So this is for females who haven't conceived after 12 months, or if you're over 35, after 6 months. Definitely these investigations are worth pursuing. So for women, preemptively, I would always want to have these basic tests covered off. And iron studies, vitamin D, looking at some of the genetic testing, thyroid function, full blood count, serum folate and red blood cell, must be a cycle day 2 or 3 hormone panel, and a mid-luteal estrogen and progesterone, which gives great information on, just that hormonal balance at that crucial implantation phase. Sometimes it's worth doing a celiac antibody test or a celiac gene test, that will depend, and then a metabolic profile. So a lot of this testing is just so beneficial for general health and well-being, but on a fertility journey, it's really crucial. Are gene tests worth it? I personally find some basic gene testing really helpful. Looking at the MTHFR gene, for example, some of the other genes that you will find. There's a gene test that I use, no longer 23andMe, sadly, because that's a bit doesn't cover what it used to. So sorry, that's an old slide. But you can do some gene testing that gives you information on your celiac risk, B12, choline, vitamin D, folic acid. There's, your antioxidant status, the way you metabolize your neurotransmitters. So there's some information that can be very helpful. It's not essential, but there is definitely some information that can be very helpful from some basic gene testing. Now, we always need to start with a general cleanup. And so that's because there is just so much in our environment. And the great thing is that clearing out things from your cupboard, like moisturizers and, cosmetics that have got a lot of chemicals in them, a lot of things like a lot of the chemicals in those products actually can be excreted within a week or two of stopping the topical use. So you can definitely benefit from clearing out your cupboards and using things that, are like foods on your skin. So the skin can soak it up, and you can get benefit instead of enhancing your toxic load and having a whole pile of xenoestrogens adversely affecting your fertility. This is just to show that heavy metals, so you'll see over here, this person who I saw way back in 2006 had extremely high cadmium and lead, and it was really affecting this fertility case. I don't do as many hair analysis tests as I used to, because I actually can find out a lot of the information by their occupational exposure, and also the number of fillings that they have, and just the products that they use. So sometimes I will do a gene test over a hair analysis test. These are the ideal preconception heavy metal levels from the Foresight website, and really they should be very, very low, and often those heavy metals are a little bit higher than what I would like, and can adversely affect egg and sperm health if they are really, if a person has accumulated a high amount of these toxic elements. And so the BPAs that I was mentioning that are often in cosmetics, as well as phthalates, can really affect implantation. And those women undergoing IVF who had the top amount of BPAs in their urine were 211 times more likely to have implantation failure. So, it's not something to ignore. And those blood levels of heavy metals are also really concerning. So it's really time to reevaluate that exposure in our environment. Is there a outgassing happening in a new home? Should we be ventilating more, opening more windows? Same in a new car, and getting rid of all the products that contain long lists of chemicals that we can't even pronounce. So this is just a look at some of the xenoestrogens and environmental toxins that are common in our lives. And another thing we should really think about is having mobile phones in our pockets, and even spending long periods on a mobile phone may have an impact on the brain, which can then affect the testes. So just being sensible, I think, not carrying that mobile phone for men in their front pocket turned on. So trying to eliminate and avoid all those things that I've just talked about is really key. So we all know the effects of stress are not good for any aspect of health and well-being. We can't get rid of all stress, so it's kind of how we manage it, and doing a little bit of an unwind every day so that the brain gets some signaling that we are not constantly running from a tiger, but we are having some downtime. So we know that chronic stress affects IVF outcomes, and cortisol inhibits estrogen production in follicle cells, leading to reduced quality and number of retrieved oocytes. I find acupuncture, which I do a lot of, is really helpful for getting women's cortisol down. And acupuncture just before an IVF can be so helpful, and letting women get their stress hormones managed. So unwinding the clock every day is super important. So whatever that might be, whatever it might look like, some mindfulness for 20 minutes, starting with 5, putting your legs up the wall, some breathing techniques, some walking in nature, some grounding, whatever it is for you. But it needs to be a daily unwind. Also, exercise can really improve IVF outcomes, but not too much. So it's a balance. So exercise for a minimum of 1 hour, 3 times a week improved ICSI and IVF implantation rates and had a reduced risk for miscarriage. But for women who overexercise, it can have the reverse effect. So that more than an hour of intense exercise a day was really associated with lower fertility rates. So we want to be moving, we want to be active, and we want to do sensible amounts of exercise. And what's right for one woman might be different for someone else. So that's going to depend on your fitness and, nourishment and a whole bunch of factors. We need to build up with good food. So cleaning out the pantry and eating whole foods, eating the sorts of things that aren't in packets that we actually need to prepare. Hopefully, if we are able to get some organic or grass-fed meats in particular, that would be amazing. But we do our best to upgrade our diet and add whole foods, and, wash vegetables if we are unable to get organic, and especially some of the vegetables on the, that have got higher exposure to pesticides. Really crucial to avoid, especially refined sugar and flour and preservatives and additives, and too much caffeine and alcohol, and definitely all those terrible trans fats from things like margarine and unstable oils. And soft drinks are an absolute killer when it comes to sugar dose, and including those with the fake sugars that adversely affect microbiomes. Avoid all genetically modified foods as well. So this is the dirty dozen. So these are the ones that we particularly want to wash before we eat or get organic. And on the other side, we've got the clean 15, which tend to have a little bit less pesticide exposure. We know that the Mediterranean diet improves IVF success rate. So women who adhered to the Mediterranean diet very, very well had a 48 0.8% live birth rate, which is pretty amazing compared to those that didn't adhere well to the diet. And that was almost like half the live birth rate. So what you eat and your lifestyle, it really, really matters for success with IVF in particular in this study. And another study from the Journal of Human Reproduction found that women with better diets are 65% more likely to be successful with IVF. And having organic foods does seem to have better antioxidant capacity than non-organic foods. It's really key that women get the right amount of nutrients, especially those women that are trying to conceive over their fertile peak, which I would consider to be, anywhere from 33, 35 onwards. In order to be fertile, we need to have good iron levels. We have a saying in Chinese medicine, you need to be blood rich in order to be fertile. And so having your ferritin over 40 is really important, and that is more predictive of better IVF pregnancy rates.